kind of a bit glary in the light. Hi, everyone. Hi. My name is Paul Callaghan. I'm a freelance writer and designer, and I'm also the co-director of the Freeplay Independent Games Festival. And yesterday, I was appointed to the board of the GDAA, which is kind of nice. So I'm very aware of what's happening in game development locally. So I want to talk a little bit about that and about some of the really interesting trends that are happening with independent development and what sort of opportunities will exist for you guys. But I also want to talk a little bit about my career as a writer and designer and what I do day to day as my job. And talk a little bit about how you guys can start thinking about maybe having a career in that space as well. And also show a lot of games that you've probably played and talk about how my job as a writer or designer fits into those. So yeah, and I'm also have time for questions at the end. So if anyone has anything desperate they want to know, maybe scribble it on your hand or store it away in your head and just save it up. So first off, I was born in 1977, so I'm 32 years old. And I've been doing this for about 12 years now. Being a professional game developer. So if your parents ever tell you that it's not possible to have a career in it, you can tell them that that is not true at all. And I imagine I'll be doing this until the day that I drop dead, probably from playing too many video games. Yeah. No one's ever whooped me before. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. So I went to primary school and high school, and during that time I played a lot of video games, and we'll take a little bit of a look at what they looked like. But I also, when I was in high school, decided I wanted to start making games as well. So I started to learn how to program, and at the time I had an old Commodore 64, if anyone's ever seen one of those. More whooping? Jeez. And so I learned how to program on those, and I learned because they used to come with little manuals that told you how to write programs. And I remember my moment where I realized that it was an amazing thing to do was when I was typing in the program. And it was a program that was supposed to make the screen flash a different color and play a musical note when you pressed the number keys, which is not all that exciting, I don't think. But the moment I got that working, I just went, I am the king of the world. I am God, King, Emperor of all I survey. And I wanted to get that rush all the time. So I started to learn more and more things about how to develop games and how to program. And eventually, I went on to university. And I did a computer science degree there, which took 4 years. And which was mostly a technical degree. At the time, there weren't any kind of game-specific courses. And I'm sure you've all heard about, you know, AIE or Monash has one and La Trobe has one. They all have these game-specific degrees. But at the time, they just didn't exist. So I came out of university, and hopefully it'll go on to the next bit. Yes, and got a job as a programmer, which was my first job, and I'll take a look at the first game I ever worked on, which was not that impressive. And I did that for about 6 or 7 years, and then I shifted into design because a project came up that I really, really wanted to work on, which was sadly cancelled after 6 months, which broke my little heart. And I took a year off, and then I became a teacher, teaching you know, kids like you guys how to develop games, how to program and design them. And then I shifted into becoming a freelance writer early last year. So I've been doing that for about 18 months. And also about the same time I took over the Freeplay Independent Games Festival. So I guess the reason I show people this is because it's not necessary, and parents hate me saying this as well, it's not necessary to have your career mapped out at all. One of the great things about working in the games industry is that you can change all the time. You might start off as a programmer and you might become a producer, you might move into QA, you might move into, you know, owning your own studio and developing your own games. You might be like me and start off, you know, thinking you want to do technical stuff, but then move into, you know, the far more creative side of things. And you can do that in a very short period of time, like 12 years. I've had so many different jobs and so many different projects and so many different skills. And that's what's great about the games industry. And you just have to choose what you want to do now at the time. You don't have to think, 10 years, I want to be doing this, because the chances are things will change. Seems a little temperamental today. So these are games that I've played and have kind of influenced me. And I think there's about maybe 60 or 70 of them in this, like starting from the very first games that I played, which looked like that. Looked dreadful. Horrible, horrible, horrible. It's like playing a Game Boy Advance through a sock. But as we kind of move through the years, you can start to see how things get more and more realistic and become more complex as games as well. Yeah, there was Ghostbusters, Castle Master, Elite. That's Lemmings. Most of you should have played Lemmings. There's Tomb Raider there, Final Fantasy VII. It's quite dark here, so we might not be able to see a lot of them. Crash Bandicoot. If I'd known it was... If I'd known it was going to be so easy to get applause, I would just have put pictures of games up there. That was System Shock. That was Heroes of the Pacific, which is a game I worked on. Ico, Grand Theft Auto, God of War, Lego Star Wars. Shadow of the Colossus, which is the best game ever made. So I have played all of these. I pretty much wasted my life, as I'm sure most of you are. It's not, oh, bless. As Portal, obviously, and Guitar. So I played all of those, and that's actually maybe 7 or 8 months out of date. So I think I've played Mass Effect 2 recently, and I'm just working my way through Dragon Age. What else? I don't know. Too many games, too little time. So those are games that I've played, and those early ones, even though they're incredibly crude, influenced me to do the sort of job that I do now. And there is kind of a through line, and if you come to the presentation I'm doing later, I'll talk about, the through line of video games and the sorts of critical ways you can think about video games if you're interested in getting a career. So I want to look at things that I have made, and I'll also show you the game that I'm writing currently, which is quite a nice, big game where I'm just a writer for hire on it. So this is the first game I ever worked on. It's a real-time strategy called Dark Planet, and I was a programmer. I did a lot of the AI logic, just characters walking around and some spell effects and stuff. It probably looks very crude, if anyone's looking forward to StarCraft 2, which I'm sure many of you are. One single whoop, aw, poor StarCraft. I'm sure it will recover. So it looks like that, basically. And that was about, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, before 3D cards were really pervasive. Probably before the PlayStation 1 as well. Around about the time of PlayStation 1, I imagine. So probably very crude. And I should have made this go automatically, but I didn't. So the next game after that I worked on was a game called Men in Black 2, Alien Escape, which I did at Melbourne House when I moved over here. This is what it looks like. It was on the PlayStation 2. There we go. And it's pretty much just a shooter.
Brock, you're in violation of Statute 635 of the Triton Accord. Step away from the desk slowly and keep your claws where I can see them. Okay.
Also, Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones didn't consent to use either their likeness or their voice.
Long enough from where I'm
hence
standing.
the reason that no one sounds like they're supposed to.
Would you believe, toasters? Waste the human!
You boys must be new in town. Assaulting an agent of the MIB will get you 20 years and a whole world of hurt.
Is that? Oh. So in that project, I did weapon effects and kind of explosions. You don't have to applaud that. It wasn't very good. So weapon effects and explosions. So anything you kind of see that flashes or flies around, I did that. So the next project that I worked on was a game called Ice 9, which was a first-person shooter developed at Taurus Games. And it looked a little bit like this. It kind of had stealth and combat elements with a sort of big spy espionage storyline. And it was pretty good. Again, though, it probably looked, because this is early PlayStation 2 or mid PlayStation 2. So it probably looks quite crude compared to a lot of the Xbox 360 stuff that you guys are playing right now. But this is where this technology was. I'm sure all of the games that we're playing right now in 5 years' time or 10 years' time will look like, you've got a sock over your head and you're playing on a Game Boy Advance. Definitely should have made that go on its own. So after that, I worked in a game called Heroes of the Pacific, which some of you might actually have played. World War II flight sim, arcade sort of flight simulator. And I was a programmer on this project again. And I was responsible for visual effects. So when you see things explode, or when you see things get shot, or when you see the bullets, or any sort of visual effect that happens on screen, that was me. I also did some work on the clouds and on the sun, and a little smoke trails coming off and a little wisps of stuff going by. So yeah, and this is probably, I mean, this doesn't look too bad for PlayStation 2. We had some incredible tech guys on that project, really, really strong, brilliant people. And it was after that that I decided to take a year off. And now I'm working on two projects. As a designer and writer. I'm working on a kind of a web-based project for SPS, but I'm also freelance writing on the new XCOM game coming out of 2K Marin. And for those of you who haven't seen the trailer, this is what it looks like. It's from the team that did Bioshock 2.
Reports of wild animal attacks in this area are not unheard of. Over the last week, the county sheriff's department has been experiencing a deluge of such reports. Worse still, as it appears many of these reports involve fatalities. And noises. What is causing the attacks or this strange phenomenon is yet unknown. Indeed, there is debate whether the two things are related. What we do know is that the people here are
Getting closer! Help
So that was recently announced at E3, so you guys can go and check out more information on that. So the two, like I kind of mentioned, the three parts of my job, which are a designer and a writer and an independent game festival coordinator person. So I want to talk about those three parts and what sort of things you need to think about if you want to get those jobs, because they are kind of very discrete jobs and they all offer kind of different opportunities, but they also have different sort of requirements for you if you're interested in doing them. So this sounds kind of obvious, I think, but it's really worth repeating that game design is all about play. It's all about designing systems and rules that people can explore and exploit and play within. And that's really what your job is as a designer. It's not necessarily your job to come up with characters or to come up with stories or to design, you know, the environments that people play in. It's to come up with what the player does moment to moment. And we'll kind of look at some games and talk about what the moment-to-moment behaviors and things that the player does as we go. So this is a game called Osmos, which is available on Steam for, I think, $3. And in it, you play a little sort of single-cell creature who can only move by expelling parts of himself. And there's no sort of story, there are no real characters here, but what the designer does is works out the rules, works out how fast things move, works out you know, how gravity works, works out where other things are placed, and comes up with how things interact and how things behave with the world and how they respond to player input. This is a game called Flower, which most of you will probably have played. And again, it's a game which doesn't really have a story, it doesn't really have characters. And what the designer's job is to work at things like, well, how fast do I move when I tilt forward on the controller? How many things can I gather behind me? Where do each of the little flowers get placed in order to have those effects? How fast do I turn? How fast does the wind work? How much damage do things do? You know, kind of thinks about what the rules of this world are. And also kind of thinks about what the player's overall goals are in the game as well. I mean, the goals in this are to kind of illuminate the other flowers and bring color back to the world. And that's the job of the designer in this project. Something like Batman, Arkham Asylum. While there is character and while there is story in this game, what the designer does is they're responsible for designing the combat system. So basically doing a big chart of how moves fit together, of how much damage things do, of doing a big sort of list of the combo chains, of working out when to be cinematic, when to slow things down, when to speed them up, working out how the other characters behave and interact with Batman, work out their AI for how they decide to attack, whether or not they're going to use weapons. So it's about designing rules. And it's about trying things out. I know in Batman it used to have a far more, it was more like Dance Dance Revolution, where a little bar would scroll across the bottom of the screen and you'd have to hit things in time in order to do the combat, and they decided that wasn't going to work. So it's also about having ideas and testing those ideas and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Again, not necessarily about characters, not necessarily about writing. So, for those of you who are interested in becoming a game designer, and I assume there are, you know, maybe one or two of you here, it's about thinking about systems, you know, a bunch of rules that connect together. I would advise you all to play board games if you don't already, because those rules and those systems and how pieces on the board interact with each other are very exposed. Video games are systems that are sort of very hidden away from you, I think, a little bit. So it's about designing systems that allow player expression, allow the player to move. So the combat system in Batman might have had one designer and that's all they did for the whole project. It's about rules. It's if any of you played World of Warcraft, you're probably very conscious of the combat and how things level up and how much damage certain things do. Someone has a great big spreadsheet somewhere or a great big thing on their wall that describes the rules for combat and the rules for engagement as well. And that's what a designer does, is they come up with those. It's about thinking about space and the level and making the game interesting for the player to wander around and interact with. And that's largely the domain of a level designer, because it's not fun if a space is big and empty and all you do is run through it, run forwards. Like if you were to make a game in this room, it wouldn't be that exciting because there's nothing really to interact with. And so a game designer is responsible for making interesting spaces to play. And it's about coming up with goals. What do you want the player to do? Obviously, the Batman example, it's about beating up those inmates. But as a game designer, your job is to establish things for the player to do and to give them reasons to do it. And that goes for board games and it goes for traditional games as well. And that's what I do, the project I'm working on for the web with SBS is very much far more about that, far less about narrative and far more about giving the player space to construct goals and to move through them and interact with the rules and the systems of the game. Okay. So the second part of my job is being a writer, which is slightly different to being a game designer. And again, it sounds really obvious, but being a writer is all about writing. And it's not just about, you know, coming up with stories. It's not just about writing them down. It's also about understanding how stories work and how those attributes of stories apply to what you do in video games as well. And I can't remember which order I had them in. Ooh, you guys will be okay, right? Okay, so this is Mass Effect. This is the previously on Mass Effect. So if anyone hasn't played Mass Effect, there are going to be spoilers here.
For as long as mankind has looked to the stars, we've wondered if we were alone in the universe. Few knew the truth. Even fewer believed. In the middle of the 22nd century, the entire galaxy opened up. Humanity discovered the Mass Effect relays, a giant network connecting all known species in the galaxy. The stars were finally within reach. Alien empires welcomed us to the Citadel, the heart of galactic government. After 3 short decades, we'd become one of the dominant societies. It was a golden age, but peace is not the natural order of things. You're either the predator or you're the prey. 50,000 years ago, an ancient race, the Protheans, was destroyed by a mysterious artificial intelligence known as the Reapers. Before they were wiped out, the Protheans left a message that the Reapers' cycle of destruction would repeat. One man chose to heed their warning.
Shepard, I've heard a lot about you.
I'm on a critical mission, and I need your help.
Commander Shepard uncovered the truth. The Reapers were returning. They had built the Citadel, and all the relays leading to it. Organic life was their crop, and the time for our harvest had come.
We impose order on the chaos of organic evolution. You exist because we allow it, and you will end because we demand it.
The Reapers are still out there, and I'm gonna find some way to stop them.
With the fate of all life hanging in the balance, Shepard launched a desperate mission to stop the Reaper invasion from dark space. Many perished in the battle, but trillions more lives across the galaxy were saved. The galactic community celebrated its victory over the Reapers, but a cautious few knew the truth. This is just the beginning. And the only thing standing between them and humanity is one person.
So BioWare are obviously massive on writing, and they have teams of writers. I think their Knights of the Old Republic MMO has a team of 40 writers on it, which is huge. It's a massive. That's as big as some entire game teams. And what the writers are responsible for is in that instance is the kind of the overarching story. So the narrative that spans Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 2, and Mass Effect 3, and whatever they decide to do after that. And they sit down and they map it all out, and they map out what you as a player are going to be doing and what the other characters are going to be doing across the whole story, and they work out what the protagonists and the antagonists are, and the kind of the enemies and the other characters. So it's a massive job. I'm not sure how many writers there are, but I can imagine it's in excess of 10, 20 people who just sit and write. And that's just for the story. That doesn't cover necessarily all of the individual lines of dialogue and the character stuff going backwards and forwards. That's just to provide a great big game that spans 30, 40, 50, 60 hours of gameplay. And they sit there and they construct goals, and they construct the planets that you go to, and what the player does there as well. So that's one aspect of being a writer, is coming up with a story. I'm not quite sure what this one is. Okay, this is Uncharted 2, and this is a scene from maybe about halfway through.
This is Carl Schaefer.
How are you feeling?
Good, thanks.
Good. Please, sit. It appears you and I have much in common, Mr. Drake.
Is that so?
Yes. 70 years ago, I came here just like you, carried into the village near death, the last survivor of my company. I was hired to lead an expedition into Tibet to find the entrance to Shambhala. What they really wanted was the Chintamani stone. So, my friend, where did you find this?
Borneo. Why?
This is the key to Shambhala.
It's the one object your opponent desperately needs, even if he does not know it yet.
Well, I think he knows. Look, I'm very grateful for everything you've done for me. I really am, but I'm through with all this.
So, they have beaten you, huh? Your quest is over?
Yeah, that's right.
What if it's only beginning?
Where did you find this guy?
Trust me, young man, your ego will mend. You're just lucky to be alive.
Yeah, you know, people are always telling me how lucky I am. But the truth is, everything I touch turns to shit.
Nate.
No, Elena, I'm done. Now come on, I'm through playing the hero.
Your adversary will not give up so easily. He will not stop until he possesses the thing he desires.
Oh yeah? Well, more power to him.
Power is precisely the problem. Some of the most fearsome rulers through history have possessed only a fragment of the Chintamani stone. Men like Tamburlaine, Genghis Khan. If a mere sliver could bestow such power, what would a man become if he possessed the stone itself?
This is crazy.
It's got to be what he's after, Nate.
Then Lazarevich really is a nut job. He's chasing a myth.
And what if he's not?
Elena, come on.
Oh, I mean, what if it's true? We've seen what he's capable of.
I understand your doubt. You require proof. Something you can see with your own eyes. Tenzin, Tinsanantara Tingondre. Find the remains of my expedition, and you will have your proof. Tenzin will guide you.
So there's a couple of things going on there, which you do as a writer. One is you actually write the dialogue, which the characters say to each other, and that'll be more like a film script because it's a cutscene. The other thing is you probably notice the characters and they all have relationships to each other. One of the things you have to do as a games writer is write a big sheet, like a character sheet that describes who they are, what they look like, what they like, what they're afraid of, some of their little personality quirks, and then you have to write down their relationship with the other characters and with the player. So it's not just a case of writing the dialogue, it's also a case of actually designing who those characters are and how they fit into part of the story and how they evolve as the story kind of evolves as well. So that's another aspect of being a games writer. This will be Dragon Age, which has a lot of branching conversation stuff.
Who comes? We were sent to find Witherfang. Bring his heart. Attacked.
Oh.
And Darren Atishan, Grey Warden. Our scouts saw you approaching and tell me you carry the body of one of our hunters with you. Ah, Dagon. He is wounded, but I think he will live. Mas Siranas, your help is appreciated. Come, Lethaline, let us take Dagon to the Keeper, and quickly. If we are lucky, we may still save him.
So, what you do as a writer there is you actually have to do like a big graph, which describes the kind of which describes the path through the conversation and also describes the responses. And you also have to keep track of how those other characters feel about you and about the player as you go through it, because you can annoy one character or you can be friends with another character, which affects what they say. And you have to write every single line of dialogue. And that can be hundreds of thousands of lines of dialogue with massive teams of writers again. So you might be given a certain area where you just think about characters, or you might be given just a single character to think about as you go through it. But you have to write every single line and think about how the characters respond to you and sort of map your way through the conversation tree again to make sure that it feels fresh and it feels interesting and it feels alive, that you're not just talking to an AI bot. Obviously, there's not a lot of writing going on there. Let's kind of move on. So the last game I want to look at if it moves on. There we go. Is in Bioshock 2. And what I want you to pay attention to is the sounds that other characters make when they're in combat, and the little things that they shout out as they're going.
Strives to frame his ideals in an image, to challenge his audience and make his vision immortal. But the parasites say, no.
Ridiculous!
So all of those little lines of dialogue that happen, like when the little sister says, "No one attacks my big daddy," or when one of the splicers shouts out "ridiculous," like there's a writer at the other end of that, and what you get in that case is you just get a big spreadsheet, you know, kind of hundreds of lines, and it just has things like attacked, attacking, what happens when you're hit, even like it's got you know, when they kind of yell or when they scream, you actually have to write in scream and then write a direction for it. And so that's the other part of being a writer's job. It's not necessarily writing story. It's not necessarily designing character. It's just writing what are called barks. It's just writing tiny little lines of dialogue that might only be 5 or 6 words, but you still have to write, you know, 600 or 700 of them for an individual game. So that's kind of the slightly, I guess, less glamorous part of the job. But it's still important, and it's still, you know, it's something that happens if you're a writer in the games industry. So a couple of things to think about if you're interested in being a games writer. It's all about story. It's really important that you understand how stories work and what effects they have on the reader or the player. It's not enough to just sit down and have an idea and write it. It actually needs to have some sort of shape and structure and form to it that you can pull the player through. You need to think about structure. Remember when I spoke about goals for being a game designer? Story is really good for giving the player goals. If you look at what happened in Uncharted, there was all of this stuff about you need to go and find, you know, the stone. And in order to find the stone, before that, you need to follow this guy and he'll show you where the remnants of my old team was. That's a goal that the player has to accomplish, and story is a way of providing that. It's about character. You know, it's about having people in the world that you care about. The BioWare games are really good at that because they have very strong, vivid characters who you want to talk to and interact with. I think Morden, the scientist from Mass Effect 2, is a really good example of a really well-written, you know, fully realized 3-dimensional character. And it's about dialogue. It's about having people talk the way they would normally talk. And it's about producing quite a lot of that for video games. And those are the sort of the 4 key things that you have to think about if you want to be a games writer. Is it going to do something? Sure, why not? So the last thing I want to talk about with you guys before I take questions is running a festival, because the games industry is in a really kind of strange place at the moment. we've sort of split into two. There's the high-end sort of AAA games, which are probably what you all get very excited about. So your Call of Duties and your Assassin's Creed and your Mass Effects, and they all exist. But they're teams of 200, 300, 400 people producing them over 2 or 3 years. So if you go in there, there's not a lot of opportunity for you to make something that you necessarily care about or that you can have a lot of creative input into. So there's also the other side. There's the independent space, the small type of game. So things sold on iPhone or on Steam for a small amount of money, where it can be 1 or 2 people sort of making games. And there's a chance to really make the game that you want to make. And that's where Freeplay sort of fits into that. That low-end area, that kind of very highly creative experimental space is where we live and where we hang out. And I think that while, you know, I will go out and I'll buy Mass Effect, whatever we're up to, 3, and I'll go and buy Assassin's Creed 3, and I'll sit and play Call of Duty, and I'll play the next Grand Theft Auto game. It's still really exciting to think that, you know, in a couple of weeks you can make something your own that's experimental. Does everyone, who has an iPhone or an iPod Touch? Do you guys have flight control on it? So flight control, the original version of flight control was made by a guy in Melbourne who worked at a company called Fireman, and he did the first version of that in 2 weeks. And that sold in excess of 1.5 million units. You know, and probably even more than that because they've just released the iPad version. So it's possible in the indie space to make a game in a very short amount of time and stick it on the iPhone or the App Store and to make a living out of it. Have you guys played World of Goo? That's 2 guys that make that game, who live out in San Francisco and who used to work at EA and decided they wanted to do their own thing. So they left, and you know, between the 2 of them, they now make a good living out of making the types of games that they want. And they're never, you know, 2 guys can't make World of Warcraft or Assassin's Creed, but you can make something smaller and make a living out of it. And these are the types of games, very experimental, very creative. This is Crayon Physics Deluxe for anyone who hasn't played it, and you draw machines to solve puzzles. And it's available on Steam and the App Store as well. This is not me playing, by the way. I'm much better at this. Ah, no. Hey! So that's the game that's in the indie space. I think it won an IGF award, like an Independent Games Festival award, a couple of years ago. We had the creator of that come out for Freeplay last year and give a talk, which is available on YouTube, about being creative and about playing that. His whole thing is he just makes as many games as he can. So he tries to do 1 a month with a time limit of 7 days. And the first version of Crayon Physics came out of that. And he's got a whole bunch of experimental stuff on his website. The guy called Pedro Puro. So this is World of Goo, the game that I was talking about. And basically you build little towers of goo to solve puzzles. And the first version of this, I think, was done in the very first version, the test, I think, was done in 8 hours. And then when they left EA to start their own company, they were looking for a project to make, and they decided to expand that into a full game. And this is available on PC and Mac and Linux and on the Wii. I think they're doing an iPhone version. And again, like I said, 2 people made this game. They did all of the art and all of the programming and all of the music. This is a game called The Path, which is kind of probably on the more experimental side of games and narrative and storytelling. It's basically an interactive fairy tale. And they've done a whole bunch of other sort of experimental projects in that space. And it's a good example of what would be termed an art game. It's not necessarily got shooting or combat or really complex mechanical elements. But the core sort of conceit is the whole fairy tale idea that in order to be safe, you have to stay on the path. But in the game, if you stay on the path to Grandma's house, nothing interesting happens to you. All of the cool stuff where you get to do and where the game is off the path. So in order to play the game, you need to break its rules, which is a really interesting conceit for a video game. But it's not really that exciting to watch in a presentation. This is a game called Braid. This was one guy basically, a guy called Jonathan Blow, and it's all about time. So in this level, obviously how time progresses is linked to your horizontal position, and it's a puzzle game effectively, with a narrative and with really strong mechanical elements. But it was done by one guy, and you can rewind time as well if you make a mistake. Who hired an artist to do the art and hired a musician to do the music. But the core of it, the crux of the work, was one guy. And this is available on PC, and I think it's on PSN and XBLA as well. And the last one I want to look at is a game called Joe Danger, which just came out on PSN. Because, again, a tiny, tiny team. This was 4 people made this. So they're all very personal games for people, and also very small teams, and a chance to really sort of get the projects right there. We've really seen a sort of renaissance in that space. Things like the internet, things like XBLA and PSN and the App Store and Steam have made creation and distribution of those sorts of games possible. And I imagine by the time you guys reach the point where you're looking at starting your own studios or looking at moving into the industry, it'll be even stronger and even more sort of simple to develop your own games and to get your projects out there if you're interested in moving in that direction. So really, making games is about a whole bunch of things. And all I would encourage you to do, if you're interested in working in the games industry or you're interested in making your own games, is just to make stuff. Because that's how you learn how to do it. You know, sit and write stories, learn how stories work. Learn how to program and to code up behaviors in AI and systems and rules and things that you can play with on your own. If you're interested in being an artist, then just draw things, just draw characters and objects and design levels and do all of that stuff. If you want to be a level designer, do it on paper. There's no need for you to go out and learn the UDK or to download Maya or whatever and build your own levels. Like, do it all on paper. Do it in Lego. I know Hideo Kojima, when he's designing Metal Gear Solid levels, he actually builds them out of Lego and kind of peers through the spaces to get a sense of scale. So just make things. And just, is that coming up? No. Just make games whether you do board games, whether or not you just do things on paper, whether or not you go and learn Game Maker, whether you go completely, off the deep end and learn C++ and or C#, just make things. That's my encouragement, and play them and learn how they work and think about them and engage with them critically. And that's all I really want to say, I think. I probably have about 10 minutes if anyone wants to ask me anything. Hi. Whoop for finishing? Oh, that's not very friendly. Hi.
How do you suggest you get into writing? How do you suggest you get into writing for games and such?
Just write, I think. Like write stories, like study, like there are a whole bunch of books about structure and about story, and just write, short stories, start a novel, write a screenplay, just write a whole bunch of things, because those skills that you develop as a writer will be transferable. But just be aware of the sort of the key differences between games and other mediums. Video games aren't very good at things like exposition or internal conflict, so you have to give the player active things to do. Like if you make a game about Batman, it's very hard to do the whole tortured Batman thing because his parents died, but you can very easily give him, I'm going to beat the Joker up, big active things. So just be aware of that, but just write stories, as many as you can, and then apply for writing jobs in companies.
Of all those components of writing and designing games, what's your favourite component to work on?
Ooh, should be careful what I say here. I like it all, but I mean, at heart, probably the story stuff. I think, like coming up with characters and conflict and big story goals. A project I worked on last year, that was what I did, and it's the most exciting because when you start writing a game, like the outline for that project I think was 14,000 words when I started writing it, and I had to spend I think 4 or 5 weeks of research before I even started writing. And when you start writing something like that, you don't know as the writer where it's going to end. So it's really exciting for you to be sitting there and to watching these characters evolve and to see how they get out of situations and to see how they solve puzzles and to see them find their voice and for other characters to interact. And then when you get to the end and you look at the whole thing, and it's just as much a surprise for you as it is for the audience because it just sort of comes out of nowhere. So that story construction stuff for me is the most exciting and the thing I like doing the most. But it's all good.
As a writer, have you ever played any pencil and paper role-playing games, and how do you think that relates to writing for video games at all?
I think it's a transferable skill set. It's all about structure. It's all about story. It's all about narrative. It's all about character. So yeah, I would encourage, if you're interested in being a games writer, those are really good things. And also, it's a good way of getting a sense of how narrative elements, how story and character fit in with mechanical elements like the combat and how things move and interact with each other. Those two things are very strongly entwined in those sort of spaces. So I think it's really useful. So yeah, I would encourage, if you want to be a games writer, to do that.
On average, how long would it take you to design a game?
Oh dear. Like I said, something small, like those flight control ones, it was 2 weeks. And I don't think he designed it, he just made it. And that was the design phase, and then, sort of polished over it. One of the projects I'm on at the moment has been, I think, 2 months in design. I've been in other projects where, they'll have like months of pre-production, 6 months. But games are always sort of, they're always sort of evolving as you play it. Like, it's never sort of set. So you only really know how to design a game once you've finished making it, I think. So yeah, it really varies depending on the project. And again, projects take different lengths of time to make. Small games can take, a month or a day, and other games 3 or 4 years. Like, I think Assassin's Creed 2 was, 3 years in development? And a year of that would have been pre-production, so that took a year to design.
Have you ever role-played in any MMOs, like World of Warcraft or DDO or anything?
I have. I've played World of Warcraft maybe about 2 years for research purposes, because I was asked to design or to pitch an MMO. So yeah, I have. I think what happened was once I'd finished the research phase, I was still playing. And I kind of thought, this is going to take up a little too much of my time and my money. So yeah, but I mean, World of Warcraft is a really good example of writing as world building. They've got an incredibly rich lore, an incredibly rich world that you can just go and hang out and play, and everything is informed by that. And so somewhere in Blizzard, there's a Bible, there's a World of Warcraft Bible, which I imagine is about this thick, just describing the history and the characters and all of that thing. And again, someone's written that and someone's story told that part of it. Does that answer your question? I mean, the short answer is yes.
How hard is it to come up with like ideas for games like Mass Effect and BioShock 2? Like, how hard is it to write the full story for it and stuff?
It's actually, ideas are easy, I think. Everyone here, right, has an idea for a game. It's about being able to turn those ideas into execution, and that's the hard part, and that's where you have to practice, because you need to be able to identify which ideas are going to work and which ideas are going to fit together. Yeah, the ideas are not the hard part. Ideas are easy, I think. It's coming up with enough ideas that you can choose which ones work and which ones are good, I think. And that's just practice. That's just training yourself to think about things. One of the things that I do when I'm stuck on an idea is I'll get up and I'll get index cards and I'll force myself to have 10 ideas and I'll just stick them to the wall. And I just stand there until it's done. And you don't ignore the bad ones, so you stick every single idea you've had there, because sometimes you need to have 4 ideas in order to get that 5th one, which might be an amalgam of those 4, but the 5th one is the one that you know is going to work. So it's more about that kind of discipline and craft of having ideas, I think. And then learning how to repeat that and have more than one. Is that it? No more questions?
Any more questions at all? Hands where I can see them? One over there, sweet.
How difficult is it to make an ending for a game? Because I know some games seem to go on forever, some games seem to stop, and then some designers have problems making an ending because they could just go on and on and on.
Endings are hard. Endings are probably the hardest thing you will ever have to do as a writer, because they have to tie everything together. And sometimes it happens really easily, and sometimes it happens really, it's just not, so it's really difficult. So it depends on the project. It depends how sometimes it's just a lightning bolt that gives you your ending, and other times it's something you really have to slog on. Like one of my projects that I'm working on right now, the ending is very difficult. And we're trying to work out how to make that work. And again, like I said, it's just about attacking it. It's just about having ideas for it. So it varies from project to project. But yeah, endings are hard, I think. But the thing is, though, when you get it right, you know you've got it right. And a good ending is just brilliant.
When you're writing a game, would you come up with an ending for it, or would you more likely go for something like a sequel? Like, would you say, oh, well, I like this game, maybe I should make a sequel, or would you just say, I'm going to end this and I'm going to make a good ending?
There are 2 different things. Like Mass Effect is a good example of a game that has closure, but that still leaves it open for the sequel. Because at the end of Mass Effect 1, you've achieved what you set out to do, which is discover, the end, spoilers, to discover where the main mass really is, to figure out who the Protheans were, but also to save the Citadel. So you've achieved your goals. The fact that those goals were part of a larger narrative is kind of irrelevant. So you map it out. As long as the player feels like they've achieved something. A bad example, and you guys are probably going to hate me for this, and I'm going to speak quickly. Gears of War. Yeah, the first Gears of War, it leaves things open for a sequel, but you haven't actually achieved anything. The story basically is in the same place at the end as it was at the start. Because it says, hey, you've dropped this bomb, you've destroyed the Locust, wait, everything's great, we can celebrate. And the camera pulls back and says, actually, you know what, the Locusts are still around. So when you start Gears of War 2, the events of Gears of War 1 haven't actually made any difference. So that's an example of a game which, while it's fun mechanically to play, and I played it and I enjoyed it, there's no sort of narrative closure, I think, within that. Might have to make this the last one, I think.
What was the...
Get stand-ups, all right? Soon shot.
What was the name of the game that was cancelled that you were sad about, and what was it about?
It was a game based on Doctor Who. And they've now done them, which is great, and I'm really happy for them. But it was way back when Christopher Eccleston had just taken over. So yeah, there you go. That's all you're getting of that story. And I think we might have to wrap it up now because it's 11 o'clock. So thank you for your time, and I'll be talking later on at 3:30 about some of the stuff that the logistics of this. Thank you.
Paul, thank you very much. Paul Callaghan, give a big round of applause.